toughest nut of all to crack was getting IBM employees to accept that invitation. Many used hierarchy as a crutch and were reluctant to take personal responsibility for outcomes. Instead of grabbing available resources and authority, they waited for the boss to tell them what to do. They delegated up. In the end, my deepest culture change goal was to induce IBMers to believe in themselves again, to believe that they had the ability to determine their own fate and that they already knew what they needed to know. It was to shake them out of their depressed stupor, remind them of who they were at your IBM, damn it, and get them to think and act collaboratively as hungry, curious self-starters. In other words, at the same time I was working to get employees to listen to me, to understand where we needed to go, to follow me. I needed to get them to stop being followers. This wasn't a logical, linear challenge. It was counterintuitive, centered around social cues and emotion rather than reason. Tough as that was, we had to suck it up and take on the task of changing the culture, given what was at stake. I knew it would take at least 5 years. In that I underestimated. And I knew the leader of the revolution had to be me. I had to commit to thousands of hours of personal activity to pull off the change. I would have to be upfront and outspoken about what I was doing. I needed to get my leadership team to join me. We all had to talk openly and directly about culture, behavior, and beliefs. We could not be subtle. 21, an inside-out world. To someone arriving at kind of hothouse quality to the place, it was like an ISO IBM from the outside. There was a aided tropical ecosystem that had been cut off from the world for too long. As a result, it had spawned some fairly exotic life forms that were to be found nowhere else. And because IBM was so deeply inbred and ingrown, so preoccupied with its own rules and conflicts, it had lost its robustness. It had become extremely vulnerable to attack from the outside. This hermetically sealed quality and institutional viewpoint that anything important started inside the company was, I believe, the root cause of many of our problems. To appreciate how widespread the dysfunction was, I need to describe briefly some of its manifestations. They included a general disinterest in customer needs, accompanied by a preoccupation with internal politics. There was general permission to stop projects dead in their tracks, a bureaucratic infrastructure that defended turf instead of promoting collaboration, and a management class that presided rather than acted. IBM even had a language all its own. This isn't to ridicule IBM culture. Quite the contrary, as I've indicated, it remains one of the company's unique strengths. But like any living thing, it was susceptible to disease, and the first step to a cure was to identify the symptoms. The customer comes second. I could make the case that during the 1960s and 1970s IBM self-absorption was actually productive. In those years, customers didn't have a lot of insight into what data processing could do for them. So IBM invented these powerful and mysterious machines, and customers looked to us to explain how the technology could be applied to make their companies more efficient. This worldview was, and still is, common throughout the information technology industry. What we could make was a starting point, not what they need. But as time progressed, business people began to understand the importance of information technology and how it related to everything they wanted to do. I know, because I was one of them. As business strategy began setting the technology agenda rather than the other way around, more and more investments that customers made in IT were being driven by line of business managers, not CIOs. Our industry, and IBM in particular, needed to adjust. We needed to open the window to the outside world. And IBM now had competition. Unix systems and the PC allowed hundreds of competitors to pick away at IBM's franchise. We could no longer run our business like the Roman Empire, confident in our hegemony, certain that those barbarians massing on the borders were no real threat. And yet I was shocked to find so little customer and competitive information when I arrived. There was no disciplined marketing, intelligence capability. What market share data we had was highly questionable, mostly because IBM defined the market unsurprisingly in its own image. We may not have known much about customers, but there was one group to which we paid plenty of attention, ourselves. In the IBM culture, the organization, and how one fit into the organization was considered a very important subject. Criminology, whereby you judge who was in and out and up and down according to the lineup of leaders atop Lenin's tomb on May Day, was a fine art. For instance, I noticed early on that in any presentation, regardless of subject, the first chart, the foil, invariably depicted the internal organization, including a box showing where the speaker fit on the chart, quite close to the CEO most of the time. Organization announcements were big deals. When you got promoted, you had a press release, a written internal announcement on our electronic bulletin board, and your boss had a conference call with all of his or her direct reports to announce the good news, with you sitting beside the boss, presumably beaming.
Each evening I'd look through my mail and email and find dozens of seemingly minor and innocuous organization announcements, like this one: the following changes have been announced in the corporate Manufacturing and Development Organization. Continuing to report to Patrick A. Toole, IBM Senior Vice President. Manufacturing and Development is Jean-Pierre Bryant, IBM Director of Manufacturing and Logistics. Reporting to Mr. Bryant are Jean-Pierre Bryant, Acting IBM Director of Manufacturing. Lars G. Ljungdahl, who has been named IBM Director of Logistics and Procurement. He was IBM Director of Logistics Processes. Reporting to Mr. Ljungdahl are Lars G. Ljungdahl, Acting Director of IBM Order Process. His organization remains unchanged. Lars G. Ljungdahl, Acting Director of Corporate Procurement. The remainder of Mr. Ljungdahl's organization is unchanged. I wanted people to focus on customers and the marketplace, not on internal status. A company fighting for survival doesn't need a published caste system with broad readership. So I ended the practice of having a separate category of IBM Vice Presidents v. plain old Vice Presidents and IBM Directors, and I banned all press releases about organization. We had some very enterprising people, however, particularly in our personal computer company. You could always tell when the PC company was about to announce a reorganization because executives would call the media ahead of time to leak the news and, in the process, make sure reporters understood how well that executive fared in the reorganization. One time the Wall Street Journal called and asked that we tell PC company executives to stop calling to leak reorganizations because the flood of calls was overfilling reporters' telephone mailboxes. A culture of no, I think the aspect of IBM's culture that was the most remarkable to me was the ability of any individual, any team, any division to block agreement or action. Respect for the individual had devolved into a pervasive institutional support system for non-action. You saw it at the individual level. One of the most extraordinary manifestations of this GNOA culture was IBM's infamous Nonconcurs system. IBMers, when they disagreed with a position taken by their colleagues, could announce that they were non-concurring. Think about it, at any level of the organization, even after a cross-unit team had labored mightily to come up with a company-wide solution, if some executive felt that solution diminished his or her portion of the company or ran counter to the executive's view of the world, a non-concur spanner was thrown into the works. The net effect was unconscionable delay in reaching key decisions, duplicate effort as units continued to focus on their pet approaches, and bitter personal contention as hours and hours of good work would be jeopardized or scuttled by lone dissenters. Years later I heard it described as a culture in which no one would say yes, but everyone could say no. The situation got even worse, because at least a public non-consent has to be defended among one's peers. More often than not, the non-concur was silent. It would appear that a decision had been made, but individual units, used to the non-consent philosophy, would simply go back to their labs or offices and do whatever in the world they pleased. Here is an internal memo sent to many IBM people in 1994. The non-concur process takes place throughout the year with added emphasis on the spring, strategic, and the fall, commitment, plan cycles. This note is the officially /me/a kickoff of the non-concur process for this year. To ensure the success of the process, I need to know the name of the person in your division/industry who will be your non-concur coordinator for the remainder of this year. I will send the detailed instructions and guidelines to your coordinator as soon as you identify him/her and their VNet ID to me. It would be a great help if you could do this by COB Friday, May 20, 1994. It is particularly important to be prepared for the issue cycle this year as we are expecting E/me/A to issue a large number of non-concurs during the spring cycle that are NLS related. Please note that your product/industry managers should be gearing up for issues to reach me through your coordinator for the spring cycle by Friday, June 3, 1994. FYI, the spring plan has been published by MND. Note that I encourage you to get your issues to me prior to the due date if possible. Please note that I will not enter any non-concur into NCMS non-concur management system unless you have the timely approval of Bill, Bob, or their designee as applicable. This also means that you must be prepared to help/escalate, if necessary, through the management chain to Gerstner, if necessary. Thanks for your help and consideration. This validation of game-stopping disagreement also manifested itself at the divisional level. Interdivisional rivalries at times seemed more important, more heated, than the battle with external competitors. Early in my IBM career, I was shocked when an IBM hardware division struck a deal with Oracle, a company that is an archiva of the IBM software unit, without even telling our software unit in advance.